and a very good morning. Yang berbahagia, distinguished Professor Dato Rasiah, the Executive Director of Asia Europe Institute. Yang berusaha, Professor Town Planner Goh Hong Ching, Chair of Social Advancement and Happiness Research Cluster. Yang berusaha, Professor Chemist Dr. Juan Jun Singh, Chair of Frontier of Natural World Research Cluster. And yang berusaha, Dato Dr. Anis Yusal Yusof, Executive Director of International Institute of Public Policy and Management in Puma, Your Excellencies the Ambassador, Deans and Deputy Deans, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our lecture today entitled Transforming the Malaysian Economy, Madani and Industrial Upgrading by distinguished Professor Dato Dr. Rasiah. Before we begin, we would like to invite Muhammad Fazil Jamaluddin for a brief recital of Dua. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin wal aqibatu lil muttaqin wa la udwana illa ala zalimin wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, O Allah, we ask you to open our minds and hearts to learn about the challenges and opportunities of economic development and transformation in Malaysia. Illuminate for us the key concepts and strategies behind the Madani framework so that we may understand how to build a more sustainable, inclusive, and competitive economy, one that provides equitable opportunities for all Malaysians to thrive and prosper. We pray for your guidance and wisdom as we listen to the insights of Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Rasiah. O Allah, make this gathering of ours a gathering of mercy and our dispersal after it a parting with protection. Guide us to be instruments of your mercy and let our efforts contribute to a world that is more peaceful, prosperous, sustainable, and in harmony. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin.
Thank you. So just to brief you throughout this session, we look forward to raise awareness about how we can contribute to economy Madani beyond the academic sphere with a focus on industrial upgrading. Without further ado, please be invited Professor Town Planner Dr. Goh Hong Ching on behalf of the Research Cluster Office for the welcome remark. Please welcome.
So, a very good morning that I would like to wish and greet everyone, all our distinguished guests, speakers, yeah, esteemed colleagues, and also very own students, yeah, from University Malaya. So it is a great pleasure, yeah, that I extend a warm and heartfelt welcome to all of you for the talk today. So today we have this talk titled Transforming Malaysia, the Madani Vision and Industrial Upgrading, which will be presented by our distinguished professor, Dato Dr. Rasiah, and will be moderated by Dato Dr. Anis Yusal Yusof. We are truly honored to host such a distinguished audience, which includes representatives from various embassies, esteemed researchers, colleagues, and especially the vibrant and enthusiastic students from University Malaya. Ladies and gentlemen, as Malaysia stands at a pivotal moment in its development journey, the Madani vision emerges as a comprehensive and forward-thinking blueprint for progress. This vision, rooted in the principle of inclusivity, integrity, and sustainability, will transcend the boundaries of our national agenda and serve as a beacon for Malaysia's global collaboration as well as innovation. So the Madani vision envisions a Malaysia that embraces technological advancement, fosters sustainable development and enhances its industrial capabilities to meet the demands of the future. In fact, also for us to be future ready as well. And this vision aims to position Malaysia as a leader in innovation, capable of driving economic growth and society progress at the global scale. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we dive into the discussions and to listen to the talk today, I'm honored to also officiate to officially inaugurate the session this morning. The talk served as an important dialogue on Malaysia's transformative journey under the MADANI vision. It is an opportunity for us to reflect on our shared goal and at the same time the required collective efforts to meet this vision. We will explore how MADANI vision aligns with the goal of national industrialization and the relevant policies which are in place, examining how Malaysia can tap on the global technological advancements, sustainable practices, and strategic investment to enhance its economic position. Also, to leverage on the multidisciplinary research capacity of Universiti Malaya, being a comprehensive university, and how we can then create the impacts for our society here. So in closing, I would like to express my deepest gratitude again to all of you for your presence today. Together, let us embrace this opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue as well as share insights this Thursday morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Goh. So before we proceed, we seek your kind cooperation for a group photo session. So it will be good if our attendees will move to the center of the auditorium to have a better visual outcome.
One, two, three. And this time. One, two, three. Okay, good. One, two, three. Next one. One, two, three.
Thank you. Moving on to our main agenda for today, please welcome Dato Dr. Anis Yusel Yusof, the Executive Director of International Institute of Public Policy and Management in Puma, and Dato Distinguished Professor Dr. Rajah Rasiah to come up on stage for our session today. Please welcome.
Can I start?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to all. truly honored to be invited. Thank you to the organizer for inviting me as a moderator. But I'm going to be this moderator that will be here for a bit and will disappear and will come back. I've just been summoned by the chairman of our board to meet her, so I have to run in between. Should I not return, I'm going to deputize to Tan Sri Jauhar to help moderate the session. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, introducing this great speaker is definitely a privilege. But more important, the organizer have organized a special talk. This special talk is very special indeed for many reasons. One, of course, we are here to look at our country's economy, and transforming it is something very important to all of us. A lot of us are looking forward to understand, and especially coming from distinguished Professor Dato, Dr. Rajah Rasiah, who was part of the team to advise the Minister of Finance on the economy of the country. Second reason why this is a special talk, because it'll be touching on this concept of MADANI. I'm still grappling, trying to understand what is MADANI, especially somebody mentioned to me recently, economy MADANI. I'm like, what is economy MADANI? So really look forward to hear from Professor Rajah Rasiah on this. And of course, third most important reason, it will be delivered by none other than distinguished Professor Dato Dr. Rajah Rasiah, a man that doesn't need an introduction. For those of you who doesn't know him, is a real missed opportunity. You have to read up. I've known him for the last 30 over years. When I was working in the UN, Rajah has always been someone that we consult. He has been an advisor to many of the work that we were doing when we were in UNDP before. So if you look at his his whereabouts, is only Cambridge, Oxford, and Harvard. And of course, he started, the most important part, he started his life in USM in Penang. And that's key because that's my hometown. That's where he started his education. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me invite Professor Dato Dr. Rajah Rasiah to deliver his talk. Silakan. And I'm going to be sitting there to watch your slide.
Yang berbahagia Datuk Dr. Anis Yusau, Yang berusaha Profesor Goh Hong Chin, Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Jauhar, Yang berbahagia Datuk David Chua, the former director Yang berusaha Professor Azira, the current two deputy directors Yang berusaha Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers and Dr. Adil, and seated beside himself was my master supervisor, Professor Johan. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me first correct a point so that I will not be accused of misrepresenting myself. I'm not Professor Emeritus. Of course, I'm old enough to be considered for that, but you can't be earning money if you had that. So instead, I'm Professor Ulung, the youngest one out of the four. There's still 10-year gap between the oldest holding the position conferred by the government. So that's just one correction. The second point I'd like to mention is, I'd like to take this lecture in a way where, in a direction where Professor Khairudin actually wanted me to do, but unfortunately, we don't really see very many young lecturers here, because one of the complaints that the Ministry of Higher Education has got is much of the research they fund don't tend, especially in the field of non-science, because we, in the non-science, are unlikely to produce patents, copyrights. Copyrights possible. Some of my books carry copyrights, but not patents, industrial layouts, or industrial designs, which means, and then subsequently from there, commercialization. So the focus for non-science research, if you want to assist, make value out of the money that's being used, is to see how much it can actually translate into policy. That's the first one. Second, how we can actually impact society. Of course, things that are commercialized also end up impacting society. Now, that's the direction Professor Kaharuddin wanted me to take. And hopefully, the applications, including those who are running FRGS, TRGS, and LRGS, will emphasize that, because much of what we see, me being a permanent advisor to KPT, don't really see much of that there. So I hope the custodians who are dealing with this themselves would value this more. It's simply like, if you ask a typical PhD student, they'll give you a set of questions that are more the one-sided type of how a thesis is produced. What, how, why, things like that. But what they don't seem to know is people who are immersed in policy, they don't anymore go in that sort of direction, because they're not trying to unravel something they don't know anything about. They already know something about what's happening. So they actually start that way. Now, if you end up sending such a proposal to a committee that thinks in that direction, then you'll produce people working on work, often also not really immersed on a profound review of the literature, but at the same time also not giving the impression that they actually know something about the subject matter. They're starting like as if they're actually outside a forest, not knowing what the trees are inside there. Policy work requires understanding to a large extent some of the trees at least for you to connect with. Now, these are things that I hope will be taken on seriously by those who actually lead the application of such policies. Now, let me come to the topic here. I'm sure many of us have heard about the word Madani. In my understanding, I think Bung Karno, the first president of Indonesia from 1945 until about 1967, before Suharto took on his position, he used that word to refer to the civil society. And he often emphasized golongan marhain, the masses. Now, I'm using this in a way where, in my context, the way I've understood it, listening also to our Prime Minister, the Honorable Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim, I do not think that he has actually created additional extension of some kind there. All I see is a deepening of the concept, a profound understanding of it. For civil society to play a productive role in society, it's not just enough to go on the streets, fight for groups of people. It's important to see how change will affect them. Now, which is why he brings in the term kemampanan, sustainability, he brings in the term prosperity, and in that sense, he's actually looking at sharing this in an egalitarian way. It's not just about a small group of people becoming rich, somewhat like what Sarawak has become. Sarawak has one of the highest per capita incomes, but much of it is enjoyed by the large firms that are involved in oil mining, for example. That's not what he's looking at, which is also the reason why, if I'm not mistaken, he suspended the MRT 3 extension so that he could use that money to pay allowances for the poor. It was already in his budget speech in 2023. Now, also important is, at all times, society is evolving. And the notion of innovation, as I see it, is, since I'm mainly involved in the economics of innovation, the area I specialize on, now, we don't look at learning as a process where you just copy and apply. That's not learning for us. Innovation starts with learning, because each time you look at a process, you're always thinking about the time you're absorbing that process, adapting it for the use that you're going to deploy it. Now, that's important. For us, innovation starts with learning, which is largely incremental in that sense. This is how Shumbita would distinguish incremental as opposed to radical innovation, which is the innovation at the frontier. Now, of course, the other three elements, which are social constructs important for building a society, will be, of course, respect for each other, trust, the word used as amanah, and of course, compassion, ihsan. Now, these are all important elements of building a truly plural society. And we heard about the concept of multiculturalism from Professor Goh Hong Chin just now, that those things completed. While the Madani vision touches on all facets of life and development of the country, this lecture explains the translation of that vision in transforming the Malaysian economy, and of course, given the limited time, and of course, my own area of specialization, which is industrial upgrading. I prefer the word industrial upgrading over, I don't know how, somehow people are looking at upgradation, but the more commonly used word in the way I've understood is industrial upgrading. The blueprint the Prime Minister presented in September 2023 on the above, which is the new industrial master plan. I was a member of that advisory group, but I will also identify some shortcomings which are important if we are going to contribute to this journey that the government has taken on from September 2023 to make Malaysia a developed country, but one that require a transformation from low to high value-added activities, all economic activities. The concept of industrial policy is, of course, important. It means different things for different people. Dato Anis was telling that he had his own view about Madani. Now, let me articulate this in a way where because I am a regular advisor to the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. In fact, I was the one who wrote the policy part of Asia as well as the Pacific Islands. It's incredible if you look at the Pacific Islands, where much of the tuna is actually fished, and how they are doing land masses that are away from each other, sometimes even 1,000 kilometers separating one small land mass from another, and yet they are surviving. The lecture starts with certain key concepts that relate to Madani economy to locate Malaysia's NIMP4. Some element of industrial policy history of Malaysia is examined to distinguish what is different from the IMP1, IMP2, IMP3, and now the NIMP4. Of course, there's quite a bit of difference. It then draws attention to how Universiti Malaya, of course, if you are from a different university, can also, should drive research activities if you are interested in contributing to policy, in contributing to work that could possibly impact society. That are targeted at stimulating commercialization, and of course, most of the time, non-scientists are not very much focused on this, although of course, I myself, having been part of teams that did scientific work, we always conceived a problem in the social sense, even the scientists, and then see how, for example, if you are dealing with, say, landslides, if you're dealing with landslides, you need to now know the geographical identification of areas where these things take place, especially where these locations have people living there. And of course, you have to locate, say, for example, the use of photonics, for example, in identifying or at least being able to examine the vulnerable areas so that you can anticipate, prevent those landslides. Not that you can prevent completely most of them, but you can at least identify areas that are considered risky and therefore alert the people so that they don't need to be there. And the same thing happens to dams that suddenly break. Recently we heard about a dam in Selangor breaking up and the consequences of that. And of course, as I mentioned here, much of the focus will be on how we relate to policy eventually. Now, let me mention that there are two important things here. If you want to understand industrial policy, if you take the UNIDO definition, industrial policy refers to any government intervention in any sector that manipulates markets. Markets in economics refer to relative prices, not the firm or not the wet market that you go to buy a grocery, for raising economic and societal improvement. Now, that's the definition that UNIDO uses. Industrial policy refers to government intervention that manipulates markets, with a focus on widening and deepening the role of manufacturing, specifically, and the industrial sector in general. UNIDO's definition includes construction in that. Previously, Nicholas Calder would have used even utility, but utility is very much into services now. But of course, the World Bank uses mining as part of it as well. But if you take the UNIDO definition of it, because it talks about manipulation, you can even have industrial policy in agriculture if it means governments intervening, for example, to quicken the proliferation of digitalization or strengthening climate resilience. That's also part of industrial policy for them. Now, I wanted to mention this because this is something very important between passive industrial policy and active industrial policy. It's easier to demonstrate. Before that, let me mention export processing zones evolved all over the world. The first one in Shannon, at Shannon International Airport, Ireland. Then the first one in Asia, Kaohsiung Export Processing Zone, 1965. But you also had Masan and Incheon in Korea. Singapore, of course, once it got away from Malaysia in 1965, straight away did not work on import substitution at all, completely into export orientation. And then, of course, the rest of the states also followed. Foreign direct investment inflows and economic convergence. This is an important element which I felt I should show it in some sort of a graphical way. Now, let me get to that rather than just reading out what's here. The assumptions taken by Jagdish Bhagawati, arguably the greatest free trader we've had, and Anne Kruger. Now, they make the argument that there is a case for proscriptive intervention. What that means is that many of these guys make the argument that because governments have intervened in so many different ways before, you have to undo those interventions by intervening and equalizing the influence of any intervention in relation to factor endowments. Of course, the logic behind is relative factor endowments define the kind of allocative decisions firms should make. And in this case, the role of government is to see that the role of that sort of a market to remove those earlier barriers. For example, what Bhagawati mentions, he's also done that with his student Breacher, but largely driven by Bhagawati's work. He makes the point that if you're looking at two different countries, the US against Mexico, you have a situation where Mexico has got surplus labor against the US, which has got surplus capital, while the US will have a situation of scarce labor, and in the case of Mexico, it will have scarce capital in that sense. The product of each one of them, so wages representing workers, labor, interest rates representing capital. And if you look at it that sort of way, you will see that before capital flows, the US would have had low interest rates because of surplus capital. US would have had high wages because of scarce labor. The converse will be the case in the case of Mexico. You'll have high interest rates and you will have low wages because you have surplus labor. And he makes the point that because states don't like immigration, I'm sure you would have heard about Trump's attempt to build a wall between Texas state, the Rio Grande River that separates Texas from Mexico. Now that obviously tells you that people, whether you're a politician or not, by and large, especially when there's a crisis, they become xenophobic. So he says it's easier to see capital flowing. And it's in the interest of both these sets of countries that you allow capital flow. And because of risks involved, things ex ante before the flow in capital, you need to undo all those, meaning you have to remove those risks and so on. So among other things, the interventions that he talks about, because Mexico cannot provide that sort of infrastructure all over Mexico because it's a poorer country, and even more so if you're dealing with Lao PDR, Cambodia, and now Myanmar. Johan will be having a workshop in Myanmar soon. Now, what that actually means is that you need to identify locations where you can provide that sort of infrastructure. Apart from water supply, power, you also need to have custom coordination. You have to see that there's stability, security, all sorts of things you can, and therefore the idea of export processing zones emerge. Now, in addition to that, as a stimulant, you need to also provide incentives for these firms to relocate from a safe location to locations that has not been tried yet. It's a bit like, I remember visiting Kenya, the export processing zone in Kenya. When I was in Maastricht as a professor, I went with my PhD student. Out there, I saw that there was virtually no firms left, simply because Deepak Lal was advising the World Bank. He says that firms don't go because of incentives. And therefore, Kenya did not do what Malaysia did, or what Indonesia and others have done. Indonesia, through the Singaporean Sovereign Wealth Fund, leased out Batam and Bintan, where even ownership is not an issue. The rest of Indonesia, you need to show some sort of ownership. Now, what that actually means is that Kenya failed to attract any firms. In fact, I saw roads almost like drains because I couldn't get a cab to go there because nobody wanted to drive in that sort of terrain. That's how bad the situation was. And this textbook armchair economist Deepak Lal said firms don't go because, not because of incentives and so on. So Kenya never met it. This is under the African Growth Opportunity Area, AGOA. And of course, many other locations too got that sort of investment, like Lesotho, Orange Free State. Now, coming back to this, what it actually means, proscriptive intervention they are talking about is refer to interventions that enable markets. That's passive. So all you do is that this manna from heaven, FDI flows in, it'll make sure that it hires low-cost labor. That leads to the removal of all labor surplus. And therefore, as labor dries up, surplus labor dries up, wages will start rising in Mexico in that case. Or if you use this diagram, you can of course then look at Lao PDR and Cambodia. Cambodia is no longer in that category, but they still enjoy LDC state, just like Bangladesh is no longer in that category because the original definition meant that per capita income was just 1,000 and less. There are three criteria. Per capita income 1,000 less. The country is in a state of crisis where governments are not in control of stability and security. And the last one, the country must accept that the part of LDC, a country that chose not to be an LDC, but qualifies in the other two categories, is Nigeria. Nigeria is one of them, didn't want to, but some countries are considered scientifically sound and stable. Although at that time, were also, if you look at it, Pakistan has per capita income is largely stagnating, but it's not an LDC because it's seen not to be in that sort of scientifically strong enough to be able to govern itself. And so is the case with Vietnam and India. Bangladesh per capita income, you all have to know that it's already overtaken India. It's got the highest, but I'm not sure what the current crisis is going to do to the last 15 years of rapid growth that Bangladesh had. But this actually means that as you have more and more capital flowing out to specialize on labor-intensive activities in the poorer countries, and of course that actually would lead to the removal, dissipation of the surplus capital in, say, the US or the European Union or Japan, which you could also. Interestingly, Japan has got a per capita income in 2023 less than that of Korea and Taiwan. These two countries have already overtaken Japan with about 37,000 US each. Singapore, of course, overtook much earlier. It's 82,000. Now, coming to this situation, what that actually means is that interest rates would start to rise in the US because the surplus capital is moving away. Interest rates would start to fall in Mexico because more and more capital are flowing in. Likewise, wages would start to fall in the US because the demand for labor will be going down because capital is moving out, while wages would start rising, say, in the poorer countries, whether it's Mexico or whether we're talking about Lao PDR and Cambodia. It will take place until there's an equalization of prices, meaning interest rates and wages will equalize at some point as these countries also develop. So that's the depiction of this diagram here. It looks very simple. So what governments do only play a passive role on focusing on infrastructure, stability, those kinds of things. But unfortunately, as the examples that I have, in fact, I have a paper which is just published, trying to compare Korea, Taiwan, Malaysia and Thailand on the semiconductor industry. Malaysia and Thailand, of course, following this passive industrial policy, remains specialized in low and medium value-added activities and is very detailed in the sense that the paper discusses the sub-industries within semiconductors itself and what they actually do in relation to even patent take-up, how high they are in the R&D scale. They have been left behind, and the gap is widening with Korea and Taiwan. These two countries have had passive industrial policies, while Korea and Taiwan have had active industrial policies. We'll come to that later. Now, this is active industrial policies, refer to governments assuming the initiative, no longer leaving it to capital markets to decide, to promote industrialization with a focus on targeting the industries, identifying strategies and including selecting, monitoring, and appraising industrial performance. If, for example, Pak Chung Hee in 1975 with the heavy and chemical industry program provided subsidized credit to the chaebols, as well as one state-owned firm, which is no longer state-owned now, POSCO. At that time, it had become the most efficient steel producer. These countries actually intervened to provide subsidized credit. In the case of Japan, until 1971, strategic industries FDI wasn't allowed. From 1971, Charles Gore makes the argument, no longer had that focus. Korea had in 1969, all strategic industries, they didn't allow FDI. Although they had Masan and Incheon, they let them operate on their own. They had no connection really with how how, for example, Samsung. Samsung started in 1969. In 1975, they went into semiconductors, enjoying that credit. But Park Chung-hee made sure that, two things he made sure. If you look at Ali Sampson's book, Asia's Next Giant, South Korean Late Industrialization, she makes the point that those firms that could not raise their export quotas, the measure that they used, were removed immediately, instantly from those subsidized credit, including the incentive to be able to sell domestically. Second, if you took that money at 3% interest rate, lent it out in the black market over 20%, you went to jail. She even quotes Park Chung-hee's own uncle was sent to jail because there was an abuse of the rent that was given there. Now, he also ensured that even though there were not, he did not introduce direct fixed exchange rate with the US dollar, but they prevented any firm from borrowing money in the US, dealing with US. Only firms with permission could do it. And besides that, before he was shot dead in 1979 by his own security guard, he also made sure that the won against the dollar did not change very much. He also made sure in terms of how those transactions were handled. At some point, he also fixed it at some point. But of course, once he was gone, they started to deregulate, which subsequently led to the financial crisis that Korea faced. But in the case of Taiwan, which took a different model, unlike the Korean one, where large firms were created through family firm mergers, preferred firms in that sense. And the second one is they became conglomerates. It's just like, we all know Hyundai makes cars, yes? But do we also know that Hyundai was the company that built the Penang Bridge? They are conglomerates into so many different industries. Because Park Chung-hee believed in the Zaibatsu of the Japanese, which the US forcibly got Japan to abandon. From the Zaibatsu system, you had a Keiretsu system emerging in the case of, if there are questions, I'll come back to that. But in the case of Taiwan, if Korea internalized, things were internalized in firms in a Schumpeterian sense, because Schumpeter glorified the large firm as the firm that has the ability to get involved in R&D because it's got the capital. He said small firms can only do incremental work. He didn't think that the micro firms, for example, can go beyond that. Now, the system has evolved subsequently. You have now networks of innovation. You have small firms, even in the US now, that connect with public labs in the universities, government labs, military labs, Delphi, for example, or the Bell Laboratory. These are all in the military. And they also can connect with other firms. So you have networks of, including, you don't need to have, say, instrumentation internalized in a firm. You can get it from and you incubate, say, in a science park. So that Taiwanese followed that network of innovation sort of logic. So you had all these relatively small firms, although some of them have become really large. The world's #1 logic chip firm is TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. Samsung leads memories. TSMC overtaken Texas Instruments to be the #1 firm in logic chips. Then, of course, microprocessors, largely because of how intellectual property right is defined, Intel remains the lead firm in microprocessors. Although, of course, a lot of it is contracted out to TSMC to fabricate for Intel. Now, that's active industrial policy. So it's active industrial policy in the way where, say, government desire, working with industry, what sort of industries should be strategized for the country to catch up. And in the case of Korea and Taiwan, to leapfrog as well, not just to catch up. Exponents of industrial policy argue that growth in the primary sectors of agriculture and mining supports the emergence of manufacturing, initial stages. This is the Lewisian argument. But because manufacturing has the capacity to differentiate, extend the division of labor, which obviously also means that spillover rises in that sort of sense, it's seen as important. And of course, at all times, manufacturing cannot continue to dominate GDP, which means to say, as the services sector, largely through the evolution of knowledge-based services, then takes on. You can look at this book by Robert Rothorn, I call him Bob, and John Wells, Deindustrialization, Foreign Trade, 1987, Cambridge University Press. They discuss the argument and make the point that the case of Japan, Germany, and the US, they were facing positive deindustrialization, which means to say value added in these countries, productivity in these countries continued to rise, even though the share in GDP had started to fall. So deindustrialization will obviously set in, but what sort of deindustrialization are we talking about? In the case of Malaysia, from something like 27% value added in gross output of manufacturing in 1991, it had already started to fall. Today is about 23%, that's all. So unlike, say, Korea, Taiwan, and China, they continue to rise, which is positive deindustrialization, and something that the government of Malaysia, through the NIMP4, are trying to reverse. My own works here in the Oxford Handbook of Industrial Policy, you can also look at it. I have a chapter called Industrial Policy and Industrialization in Southeast Asia. So it's not just Malaysia, Singapore is also there, which has used the leveraging strategy, very much the type, not many people seem to remember this, very much the Ireland introduced. Remember that Ireland's per capita income is 100,000 US, against Singapore's 82,000, which is fairly close to the country that has the highest per capita income in 2023, which is Luxembourg. Now, Ireland's population is similar to that of Singapore, over 5 million people. A lot of them are also human capital that have been brought back, not just their own nationals, but others too. And they use a leveraging strategy in the sense that they attract FDI, but ensure that upgrading is achieved in these firms if they are going to enjoy grants, if they are going to enjoy incentives. Some states like Brazil, I remember doing field work in Sao Paulo, the state of Sao Paulo. Those stringent things were there, and they didn't apply it, say, for example, in Manaus, which is between the Amazon and Manaus River. At the confluence there, much of it was like passive industrial policy. In my trip to Brazil in 2002, Lula was campaigning at that time, the current president. This is what I see in the end. If you look at the work of Yukiko Fukasaku, Technology Development in Pre-War Japan, Mitsubishi Nagasaki Shipyard. When I did history until Form 3, I knew that, and I remember that, the Japanese won the Russo-Japanese War, 1904, 1905. Of course, I didn't know at that time they had super tankers. The history that I learned Reading her work, she was supervised by Christopher Freeman. I reviewed it for a journal. Now, I found very interesting because she used oral history, connecting people. Fortunately, Japanese people live long. The guys who were retired, even the guys over 100, she interviewed them. The kind of technology that was brought from abroad, originally for Britain, but she gives most credit to Germany. If they acquired an equipment, their men did not just go there how to use them, but to learn the entire process behind it, how they were doing things. You should actually read that book if you think you want to find the answers. She then thought Japan already had super tankers, 1904, 1905. They also had carriers. Some people have this idea that these small planes from Japan just flew to Pearl Harbor and bombed them. They had carriers to take those small planes, and then how the kamikaze efforts took place then. I'm not glorifying the war as it is, but I'm just telling how technology evolved in Japan, and that didn't come from crunching numbers. Policy work, it's just like the paper that I published. I have a few formulas that I work on, but only where it is necessary. And I learned that actually because I did 2 months MPhil at Cambridge. I sat in Hashim Pasaran's class. You should learn from such people. Incredible econometrists will know and tell you where it can be used and where it cannot be used. And he often came out in BBC to say that he had little to contribute on the Russian crisis then, because I'm not sure if you all remember, Jeffrey Sachs was advising Russia, and of course Russia's inflation rate had soared to over 1,000%. Jeffrey Sachs then, very different from the Jeffrey Sachs today, said that Russia has had so much of interventions, you need to have shock therapy. The patient has to suffer, which led to Margaret Thatcher making the point, if it's not hurting, it's not working. I'm not sure. Johan and me were there at that time in Cambridge. Now, this is something I wanted to disclose, why at all times governments must intervene in circumstances like this. Knowledge is a public good. There's a difference between a public good and a public utility. You can go back to Samuelson 1954, where he makes that distinction clear. A public good is both non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Once created, you don't have to create it anymore, unless you patent it. How IP sometimes destroyed the spread of knowledge, which can be beneficial to society. Second, it's non-excludable, even though you impose copyrights and so on, which is the contest now going on with geopolitical tensions between China and the US, for example. The US has prohibited firms like Huawei, ZTE, and so on from China, claiming that they violated IP rules and gone ahead with their 5G and so on. Let's see how far they go. It's a question of who has the endurance to last this contest. But again, to make that point, the US too, if you remember, 1791, it was Alexander Hamilton advising Jefferson, the president, telling that industrial policy and interventions a must if you want to reach the levels of Britain, which is what Jefferson did then, Thomas Jefferson did then. Now, these are all documented. You can, of course, get that. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is, and this actually, part of it benefited from the science minister of Germany when I was in Hamburg. They regard, when you invest money into research, to produce new knowledge, that's research. Now, you will have all sorts of knowledge that evolves. Not all of them are patentable. Not all of them translate into designs. Not all of them come out as industrial layouts. Some of them, because you cannot verify subsequently, like the tire, for example, or for that matter, Kentucky Fried Chicken, they use trademarks. It's a trade secret, but they know many others know those formulas. And therefore, people see it as a way of identifying with the name, with the brand name, trademarks. Now, there are a whole lot of knowledge in the process that are not in that official classification under intellectual property rights. They actually lead to others gaining, other economic agents gaining, appropriating, and coming out with those products from T1 to T, the several Ts that I have there in time. Now, that's a public good where clearly there's a reason for governments to intervene, because the benefits the society gets is enormously more than a private agent. which is why, and of course, some call it development, when you bring that knowledge back to money. Some call it commercialization, some call it innovation. But whatever term that you prefer to use, this is an area the US for a long time funded through the military. They funded through the military. It was easy whenever a thing of that sort is happening, put it under, under the military. And now, of course, the very chip that the US came out first with through the Bell Laboratory, including the private firm that was born from it, Fairchild, which doesn't exist now. Now, that was actually driven by military interest because they were very much engaged in the war with Germany, radar, precision control, and so on. But the way these firms emerged in Korea and Taiwan, nothing to do with the military. They're all private firms dealing with consumers like you and me. This is something this is in a book that is coming out now, but it's already something I've used. If you are looking at how firms can upgrade, firms themselves cannot simply internalize everything themselves and do it their way. Even those firms that are chaebols, that are conglomerates. Governments then should see how basic infrastructure, the distinction with science, technology, and innovation infrastructure is, out there you have lots of public goods as opposed to just basic infrastructure. And then it's not just enough to have all these organizations. The organizations are there to solve collective action problems, which individuals themselves cannot. You can't expect a few individuals to run universities. You can't expect a few individuals to run an R&D lab. These are areas that require the formation of organizations that can help solve collective action problems, in that way assisting firms. That's the ecosystem I'm talking about, the embedding ecosystem. And then, of course, these things cannot function on their own. They need to be integrated globally, integrated into factor and final markets. It's not just about exporting and importing. It's also about connecting with knowledge nodes in the world. For example, the Koreans in semiconductors, they acquired Schlumberger, they acquired Zilog, a few other firms, before they launched to catch up and then leapfrog in the memory industry. Or for that matter, in the case of TSMC, they had a joint venture with the Philips, 1987. Eventually, they took over. But Philips, at that time, was offloading the semiconductor division to go back to the original business, which is power. In the case bulbs and so on. You look at all these smart lights and so on, they went heavily into it. Likewise, Siemens started with power, got into semiconductors, but they then offloaded their semiconductor division to Infineon and Kimunda. Kimunda, of course, is because of cash flow problems, taken over by an American firm. But the case of Infineon is still there. Infineon is in Munich, while Kimunda used to be in Aachen, still there. Now, that sort of integration also means connecting with frontier universities. So you connect with them, which is a lot to do with how the Chinese have caught up in electric vehicles. 40% of electric vehicles, really, the cost comes from lithium batteries. And longevity and heavily extracted that sort of knowledge from abroad. Now let's come to the Malaysian case, where then I'll bring the NIMP4. IMP1, IMP2, IMP3. I actually reviewed the IMP1 when I was doing my PhD. I thought that was a nice way to get into data. So I came back, spent some time and went back where I was doing my PhD. The second one, I was in the advisory group. The third one, I actually wrote most of it, even though I didn't believe in what I was writing. If you are facing steering committees, you cannot get policies through. If you say, well, I don't like this, no, you can't do that. So I ended up doing things I didn't much believe in. But they all lacked proactive government role. It's just like the science and technology parks that evolved in Malaysia in 1991. The idea of getting those science and technology parks with the incubators was great to me. But the way they were governed, completely useless. There was no proper selection, there was no effective monitoring, and there was also no appraisal to see whether the money invested in them was coming back in some sort of work. A classic example would be the Malaysian Institute of Microelectronic Systems. A whole lot of focus was put on it. It was started in 1985 in the Prime Minister's office. They were supposed to replicate the example of the Electronic and Service Research Organization, which is one of the ITRIs that was started in 1974. But look at the case of the Taiwanese. They have managed to launch more than 100 firms. A lot of them are at the frontier. It's not just TSMC. You're talking about Winbond, Vanguard, we're talking about UMC, United Microelectronic Company, and many others. Now they are, that time they didn't do it, but they're now quite big in chip design, for example. MediaTek is the number 4 firm in the world. Qualcomm remains the number 1 the American firm, but it actually tells you that process of proper selection, monitoring, and appraisal has worked. We don't have that sort of thing here. That something that I've also already mentioned that just now. The innovation performed in Malaysia can be deduced from patents filed in its leading manufacturing industry, which is semiconductors, compared to Korea and Taiwan. Let's. This shows we are deindustrializing, yes. Manufacturing in GDP, but are we deindustrializing in a manner where we can call it positive? Now, let's, and also it's reflected in the per capita income. Just look at, the World Bank doesn't carry Taiwanese data, so I can get the last few years, but I couldn't get the years behind. So you can see how far, Korea had a per capita income less than that of Malaysia until 1979. 79 it overtook, then it came back down after Park Chung-hee was shot dead, and then second oil crisis. But from then on, Korea has left Malaysia so far behind that its per capita income with 52 million people against 34 million here, 3 times more than 3 times that of Malaysia. That's the Korea's per capita income, which is also reflected in its manufacturing sector's push. Now we have here patents filed. Electronic firms, Malaysia compared to Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan. Now, I don't have Singapore there. I should have not included that. I thought of including, but Singapore too is not highly successful in this. They are abandoning semiconductors. They are only focusing on chip design. Now, just look at how far behind from 1981 to 1990. We have a situation where none of them had patents to show. Then you see the jump, the leap Korea and Taiwan has taken since. And still, Korea and Taiwan, the patent filing in the US, I use the US because that's the most rigorous classification of patents. That's one. Second, you also avoid double counting. If you take national patents, these patents are just sometimes only taken for utility purposes, not because they are a real design as such. Now, let's get to the key goals and targets of NIMP4. The NIMP4 is predicated on lifting economic growth in Malaysia by intensifying manufacturing growth, with a focus on moving manufacturing from low and medium value-added activities to high value-added activities. The rapid economic transformation is also targeted at stimulating wage growth. The median household income for Malaysia 2023 was 2,600. That's the median as opposed to the mean. And they were expecting through this transformation 6.5% per annum GDP growth annually over the period 2023 to 2030 to raise that median to 4,510 in 2030. That's how it is planned. And it's in a way also consistent with the shared prosperity vision that Tun Mahathir announced, except that the steps to be taken way different from what IMP1, IMP2, and IMP3 did. Among other things, it's got a dashboard for monitoring. Unfortunately, the only thing it doesn't have is, it doesn't really follow, because there is an expression in industrial policy accounts, the cat can look at the king. So you can look at how the frontier firms above are functioning, the levels of technology they are at. And then you can learn from them. Not just learn from them, but avoid the mistakes these firms made to get there. And you can skip, not only skip stages, you can have adaptations that you think are better ways to get there and to overtake the incumbent, which is what Samsung and TSMC did. Now, these are the goals in relation to that. What the situation was in 2023, which is the second last row, and the last row, the expectations in 2030. I mentioned about 4,510 median income, or you can call it fair income. What Rafidi, the minister, says is progressive wages. And he's left the job of minimum wages to YB Stephen Sim. And of course, the rest of the items are there. In the interest of time, the GERD is gross expenditure in R&D. Gross expenditure in R&D, the countries with the highest in GDP are Israel and Korea, slightly more than 4.5%. Malaysia went up to 1.5% in 2015. It's come down to 1% now. I hope it doesn't go further down. China's is over 2%. Korea and Taiwan over 4% each. These are the missions and enablers for NIMP4. Now, NIMP4 called for 5 missions: advance economic complexity, tech up for a digitally vibrant nation, push for net zero. This is a carbon net zero. By 2050, Malaysia's target is to reach carbon net zero by 2050. Indonesia's is 2060, Thailand's is 2065. Safeguard economic security and insecurity. And then now we have the enablers, the 4 enablers: mobilize financial ecosystem, including supporting startups, foster talent development and attraction. They subsequently have now, I'm not sure whether they've already executed, experimental 1,000 firms where they provide wage subsidies. Of course, they encourage firms to do it voluntarily, but they are actually providing subsidies for a while before they take it out, because they want to raise wages, as I mentioned, the median wage to go up to 4,510 by 2030. Establish best-in-class investor journey for ease of doing business. Introduce whole-of-nation governance framework. In other words, they expect to see not just pockets in particular locations to evolve, but synergies to reach all corners of the country. This is more or less it. Missions and enablers, NIMP4. I already mentioned it earlier. They to be executed and achieved through the enablers, the 4 enablers, and then you have the 4 goals. Now, I come to this point: can the NIMP4 help make Malaysia develop? I think it's a very ambitious plan. It requires the establishment of such goals and targets. I believe it's a brave attempt. The use of a dashboard to monitor and govern upgrading is good, but the governance targets show little understanding of manufacturing. That I must say, because this is not a situation where, in the case of Taiwan, the man who many others did, but the key man was Maurice Chang. Maurice Chang was the senior vice president of Texas Instruments when he left to go and orchestrate the Taiwanese catch-up. He left. He is the one who advised the acquisition of RCA by United Microelectronic Company. He took leadership of TSMC, but he was the guy behind orchestrating and bringing back people. I had the opportunity to speak to him in 2002, and in 2009 to speak to Wu Tai Yuan. He was from IBM. But of course, at that time, he was the Semiconductor Association president. Now, show little understanding of it, especially lacks a profound taxonomy based on trajectories to stimulate upgrading from low and medium to high valued activities. I will give you the example because although I know semiconductors very well, more than any other industry, but I just did this book for Oxford University Press, which is forthcoming. It's called industrial upgrading in the textiles and clothing industry, Pakistan and late industrialization. It actually had a profound understanding because I took Pakistan because they have hundreds of firms in textiles and clothing. We don't have that. We have not more than 60 firms here. And in order to run complex regressions and metric inversion, you need large numbers. And therefore, I got a PhD student from there to do it, and I myself visited them too. And it will be also launched there, not just in Malaysia once the book is done. But I'll show you the taxonomy on the basis of trajectory and then the value chain itself. And I don't think the NIMP4 does that. We suddenly chose chip design. And a second problem I also found with that is we have, in the case of Malaysia, taken on this argument by Hidalgo and Hausman. Hidalgo and Hausman talk about increasing complexities. I met them when I was on sabbatical at Harvard. They agreed with me, but they thought it's too difficult to get into what I was telling them. So they continued with what they were doing, which is, but complexity, just look at it. A person who looks at industry will be able to tell you, if you take SITC, Standard International Trade Classification, or if you take SIC, Standard Industrial Classification, the 5-digit gives you the most complex, the 6-digit is the firm. Or in the case of, that's SIC, but if you're taking SITC, the 6-digit is the product. Now, if you look at the SITC 5, microprocessors are jumbled up with capacitors, resistors, and so on. Would you imagine how complex is a capacitor and resistor? They are actually passive semiconductors. They have nothing to do with any electron movement. Compared to microprocessor there, or for that matter, any other lower order chip, dynamic random access memory, or read-only memory chip. Now, that doesn't show complexity at all. That's exactly what we have done there. And complexity can be taken in the form of, although it's not exactly the same, value added in gross output, which is a figure that you can easily get because the stats department collects that sort of information. Unfortunately, that they didn't do. Now, the choice of chip design. Because I've been to all these firms from end to end, and in my understanding, chip design is predicated on economics of scope, not economics of scale. In fact, I gave a keynote speech at IIM Bangalore in 2005. There were 500 engineers there. I asked them this, Infosys and Wipro, you guys are large. Why do you need to be large? Is your unit cost going down because you're large? The answer was a complete unanimous reply, no. Because they have so much of demand. And on software designing, they have all these people there, but the unit cost is not going down because of scale. Which obviously means that why do we need a park? In Singapore chip design, A-star and 4 are involved. Most of the chip designers are in the universities. Individuals are doing it, and we also have some of them here in our engineering faculty. Hari Chandran is one of them who's got patents. He's a professor here. So my own feeling is these guys who are doing this, creating parks, doesn't show that the elements of the synergy you get from having a park will be that helpful to me. And Singapore needs that. Singapore has already abandoned. If you look at my 2020 chapter on in the Oxford Handbook of Industrial Policy, Singapore, I already discussed that they are basically phasing out the assembly and fabrication of semiconductors because they no longer see that they have the endowments to do it. Not just that, the universities are not into extensive semiconductor research. So what it actually means is that they are actually phasing out incentives for them and grants. They are not chasing them out yet, but once you are removed of that, it's unlikely that these firms would remain. They do 8-inch. TSMC was doing 8-inch wafer fabrication there. In fact, I was in a government committee here when Samsung applied. Samsung applied to do 12-inch wafers here, 2004. They wanted capital upfront. And 20-inch, 12-inch wafers are still the frontier in terms of diameter of the wafer. even though it's been there for a long time. The 18-inch one hasn't come out yet. The second thing they wanted, because of the Washington Treaty of 1989, OECD firms, wherever they are located, regardless of whether it's an LDC or not, they must ensure that they are not throwing out any pollutants. They wanted the state here to ensure that that takes place. And the third one, they wanted 5,000 engineers, including if they don't have the capacity to hire from here, to bring from abroad. They were okay with the government here was okay with the third one. The first two, they said no, even though I was trying to encourage them. Nowhere in the world frontier fabrication goes, even the US or Germany, they give capital upfront because of the kind of risks involved. But you can leverage by giving that, expecting them to do what you think should be done. That leverage Singapore uses. Now, unfortunately, Samsung went elsewhere because we were not giving the first two. And if you are looking at wafer fabrication at that sort of level, even the US provides that sort of capital upfront. Same with the Germans. So my own feeling is, as far as the policy is concerned, while the figure 2030 is difficult to predict whether they will achieve this, the three key Madani prongs of the NIMP4 that look noble are innovation, sustainability, and prosperity. In addition to strong recalibration essential to address unaccounted elements and random events, the elements of respect, trust, and compassion are critical. It's good that they have that, the 6 tenets of the Madani approach. Now, because I was asked, I'm not sure if there are any lecturers here, because part of the reason was for me to reach them how to write policy applications, which I'm now going to, as a permanent advisor to the KPT, I'm going to tell them that the people who apply themselves are not interested in seeing whether, which is why Malaysia is ranked something like among the 20 highest countries in relation to innovation input, which means to say grants given by the government, private sector, on about the 20th in the world. In terms of innovation output, publications mainly ranked around 30. But when it comes to innovation efficiency, which talks about translation into commercialization, translation into policy, translation impact for society, it's ranked above 100, which is clear that much of the research that's done in the university is not meeting what would be helpful for society as a whole here. Of course, many scientists do it here, non-scientists, virtually none from what I gather from the statistics that I got from them. Now, Universiti Malaya should take advantage of the direction the Madani Malaysia government has set to steer Malaysia towards a developed and mature economy. The policy focus of the sciences and economics should be at targeting their innovation trust towards sectors and industries earmarked by the government for special focus. These are the sectors really identified there: national security, which includes health, food, and defense. Food, of course, has become a serious problem here. Our self-sufficiency rate for rice is 69%. Even Indonesia is 95%, the comparable year. Upgrading towards higher value-added activities, without which you can't pay higher wages. You cannot achieve the objective of achieving a median income of 4,510 by 2030. It's 2,600 it was last year. And of course, they have this semiconductors and chip design, specific mission of the Madani government. They've announced some parks already, chip design park. My question is, do you need a park for chip design? I didn't see it as something I've seen across the world. In fact, I even checked. I have a student who was a managing director of Intel China. He also didn't see it as something relevant in relation to promoting chip design. But I think areas where Universiti Malaya have done well, and they should pursue to help government meet carbon net zero in relation to climate resilience, they should actually translate a lot of what is happening in the engineering faculty. We should, by now, should have driverless buses in campus. Singapore announced it that they already have driverless buses. And then, of course, I see some big, large firms doing it, robotizing harvesting of palm oil, say. But that's not rocket science, actually. The simpler parts of robot technology, IR 4.0 technologies, I think they should. And they should extend what Aerodyne is doing, helping with paddy farming, intensive farming, not just about spraying organic fertilizer, insecticides, but organic fertilizer, but also in terms of planting and so on. In a small scale, Aerodyne is already doing, but the university should do work of that kind to be impactful to society. And of course, UM has done very well on vaccines, and I think they should extend this further. The two major generic missions of the Madani government is to quicken the diffusion of digitalization and to strengthen climate resilience. This is environmental, social, and governance practices. The government is seeking to raise median household income, something I already mentioned. The policy focus on the arts, humanities, and social sciences should be on strengthening multicultural respect, trust, and compassion towards nation building. Instead of individualized disciplinary emphasis, Universiti Malaya should focus on multidisciplinary research to ensure greater impact to society. Look at international grants, which is what the Newton grant, for example, emphasizes. It's basically led by social scientists, but scientists are the guys part of the team. Eventually, let's go back to society, which is also the reason why between helping society, you have now see the transition from the triple helix, the Vinnova model of Sweden, has now moved on to become the quadruple helix because civil society is an important member of that, which focuses on poverty alleviation and climate resilience, which also explains why Sweden and Norway has seen a trend fall in gross expenditure in R&D as a share of GDP. They've seen a trend fall because of the focus on other aspects of society. Now, contribution to society. While contribution to society can take narrower and broader meaning, there is a need to get focus on direct impact to Malaysia's population, infrastructure, and environment. Most faculties at Universiti Malaya already have research activity on societal problems. Research and development to prevent cure of pharynx cancer, for example, improvements to surgical operations, vaccine development, development of human aids, including limbs, which the engineering faculty does. Efforts must be taken to quicken the fabrication and diffusion of smart agriculture. This is smartifying agriculture, manufacturing and services in their diffusion across the country. I'm not sure how many of them are engaged in bringing it on to society. The critical government-funded grants should emphasize this. FRGS virtually doesn't, from what I saw from the KPT as a permanent advisor to them, the ones that were approved, the way we rate, once you rate a grant less than highly recommended, it no longer gets into the shortlist. And now I'm not sure whether we are doing justice to those who are working on policy. As being part of MOHE's permanent advisory board member, I can say that most FRGS grants submitted for screening at the ministry come out with little link with government policy and societal impact, which they themselves recognize. But now they are working towards seeing that there is an overhaul. Now, I wanted to show this because this is coming out in that book that I talked about, identifying the value chain in textiles and clothing. Now, this is what has happened now is what Gary Graffy began with, that brand holders in the West drive chains. It's no longer the case. First, they were destabilized by the global financial crisis because American firms are highly geared. When interest rates go up, the capacity for them to maintain cash flow goes down. Unlike Asian firms, they are largely equity driven. They are much more stable in that sense. Now, the second time they had this phase was the COVID 2020. No demand at all, but you still have to pay interest rates, and in the case of the US, higher interest rates. Now, what that actually meant is that many of them were destabilized to the point where now we have a juncture where firms like Everest Textile from Taiwan, Textile Alliance from Hong Kong, Toray, Kanebo, and some from Japan, they themselves are equally placed now as powerful now. And not only that, demand for clothing designs in Japan, because it's a rich country, Even India and Pakistan, they have their own brands that sell in their own countries, or even Bangladesh. And then, of course, in China. So, which means to say that it's a spread in what final demand means. And therefore, these firms have become quite powerful, that you can look at the book, look at the evidence. And of course, those firms have this. Everest Textile, for example, has a subsidiary that fabricates robots. Taiwan, that went to the US because of Trump's raising of tariffs from China, they actually worked with Delphi to completely robotize their stitching, which I thought was not possible. They managed to do it, and they are in Arkansas, in the US. That just to tell you that these firms, they don't really follow the typical neoclassical argument that textiles and clothing being labor intensive, they'll gradually go to the poorer countries. They remain in these countries, not the way the West did. They Japanese firms, Taiwanese firms, Korean firms, Sankyong, or Taiwan, they are actually at highly sophisticated companies that have high value added activities, but they still remain. They have not suddenly branched out and go to structurally different industry as such. And the second one I want to show what I think the NIMP4 should do, we should assist. In the tracing of it, I was able to distinguish capabilities on the basis of human resource, process technology, product technology, organizational and management capabilities. Level 1 is starting one, then you can go until level 9. Now, Pakistan doesn't have level 8 and level 9. We studied more than 503 firms we studied. And I personally visited some of their cutting-edge firms in Faisalabad as well as in Lahore, as well as Karachi. Now, we are talking about the Japanese firms I gave you, or the Hong Kong or the Taiwanese firms, they have 8 and 9. And you get, what it means is that by looking at the firms ahead, you can picture where you are. There you can locate the Malaysian firms there, and then look at strategies to catch up with them. And then subsequently think about whether you want to leapfrog. In some industries, there is no need to leapfrog. UMC strategy, United Microelectronic Company, was not to leapfrog. Their idea was to catch up and proliferate so that they get into different uses, which is what UMC strategy has been. Its first MD was Robert Sau. I'm just making that point. So let me now turn to you if you have questions, because this lecture also includes that I pitch it in a way where it also answers questions that you may have in relation to the lecture. Thank you very much. Tan Sri Johar, are you going to assist Prof. Hadira? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Rajah. So we would like to invite Professor Town Planner Dr. Goh Hong Ching to lead the question and answer session. So should you have any question with regards to our topic today, please feel free and our secretariat will be happy to assist you.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much, Prof. Ulung Rajah Rasiah. If you take a look at that, right, what I also learned from you, I mean, being not an economist by training, being an urban planner, I think we do share some similarities as well, because in urban planning, we used to say that we see urban planning like a human body. So it's not about the veins, but it's also about the organs. None actually, right, all of them have to work. And this is where that, right, in your talks, I see what you mean by integration then. So thanks also for enlightening us, right, to look at the reality, what Malaysia is facing now, and walk us through the evolutions when we talk about IMP, started with the first one, that was when I was in primary school. And then until now that we have the IMP4, as well as, right, so far Malaysians' performance, yeah, as compared to the Asian countries especially, as well as the importance of integrations and of policy and governance. especially. I would like to now already open the Q&A sessions to the room. If you possible that, right, I would like to also request if you can introduce your name and also your affiliations before the question. Thank you. Yes.
Hello, good morning and Assalamualaikum. I'm Associate Professor Dr. Siti Arni from Academy of Islamic Studies. I'm from southern part of Malaysia, Johor, and I've been living in UK for 5 years. And I love very much, of course, high-speed train. Just now you mentioning about passive policy for industrial upgrading. One of them is transportation. What do you think of the possibility of to realize HSR in Malaysia? And if the project will be realized, how can we trying up to the maximum to get the maximum benefits from the project? Because I think many people in Malaysia are very keen to the project, but at the same time, many people also thinking about the feasibility, the cost. All right, thank you.
Thank you for the question, because it now raises an important assessment, one on feasibility. Let me mention that as an example, before I get to your question directly. When Malaysia chose to go from simply exporting crude palm oil to processed palm oil, the World Bank sent a team led by Ian Little and James Mirrlees. James Mirrlees was a Nobel laureate. He's the guy who, in printed terms, gave us the GST. And he was advising Edward Heath then in the early 70s. He's already died now. He was from Churchill College, Master, Cambridge. Now, let me mention that their study using static prices, static shadow prices, meant quite clear statement that no go for Malaysia, it will not succeed. But Malaysia went ahead and became the chief exporter of processed palm oil. In fact, it's been one of the biggest exports Malaysia has generated. Now, I brought that example because I myself feel that the feasibility study that was done, the cost-benefit analysis that was done on the speed trains used those static prices. It's a bit like the North-South Highway. I'm not sure whether you're still aware. There are a whole lot of criticism when Malaysia launched the North-South Highway. And of course, the only restriction was we borrowed yen loans at a time when the yen was quite low. And then 1985 Plaza Accord, the yen had to be floated because of pressure from the US, from the Plaza Hotel where it took place. Of course, not just the yen, but also the won, the new Taiwan dollar, the Sing dollar, and the Hong Kong dollar were floated. All of them rose. That we had to pay higher debt service. But today, does anyone complain that the North-South Highway shouldn't have been launched? If you use those static prices, shadow prices, that's what the outcome you'll get. So likewise, I feel that should be redone. Second, I do believe that these technologies are relevant. These technologies are relevant. The most profound expansion of that can be seen in China. Even in areas like Guyang, which is in Goju province, places I visited. In fact, I went from the airport to the university. I didn't see a single vehicle, but the highway was so modern. It was so modern. Now, how do you really now estimate these things? Because sometimes things require what you call interdependencies. It doesn't mean because you cannot just turn it into dollars and cents. In fact, I was invited with the Chinese wanting to pay a trip from Tianjin, which is by the port, by Beijing is a bit inside, till the border with Kazakhstan. High-speed train both ways. But I didn't have the time to go. I could have had a free ride there. But the point I wanted to make here is, I agree that that they should reactivate it. I think the main problem is costing. And since it originally was announced under this debacle of 1 MDB, it was already stained from the beginning. So apart from that, I feel that the idea of having, including the one ECRL to the east, should be resumed, and a proper dynamic rather than a static shadow price argument should have been used. Which is like, if you look at all the works that I've seen, export processing zones done by those people who use the static prices, they all are failures. I don't think that's the case with many of them. Some of them are, yes, but not en bloc all of them are failures. They should look at instruments that are more sophisticated and provide the reasons behind why. The dynamic one is just like, I often use input-output tables, inverting those matrices, which is main part of my PhD. Now, you can also then work using those tables with those of countries that are above, which are some of the consultants I did, for example, for Vale, which is the world's #1 mining firm from Brazil. I actually did those things for them, and it actually shows if as it is now, the firm is not doing well in Perak because they did not do the promotion of the downstream industry. And therefore, now Vale exports straight to China rather than going through this process, because they were looking at doing much more because of the rule of origin. You cannot, the tariff, they can enjoy the rule of origin if you have at least 40% recorded, either in Malaysia or cumulatively over ASEAN. If you doing it, the reason behind why Wale located that was for that. But unfortunately, we had no promotion of downstream. They were just coming, instead of bringing iron ore to enjoy that 40%, they started simple trade instrument. They started to process that to iron pellets to provide the 40%. But after that, there's no takers. There's no link to our proton jelly, for example, cold rolled steel. You either have blooms, bars, or those sheets, billets, sorry. Billets, the three lines where steel will be used. But that sort of linkages was not promoted the way Taiwan and Korea would have done. In fact, even China Steel from Kaohsiung was keen on coming here, and then decided not to because they didn't think that our industrial policy was promoting all those spillovers. Yes, sorry.
Good morning. Good morning. You hear me?
Sleep.
Yes. Okay. Good morning. So my name is Radames Gomez. I'm the ambassador of Venezuela. So my country has been suffering the effect of sanctions that try to reduce regime change. These sanctions had a serious effect on the economy, even though we have seen some changes in terms of food security. Before sanctions, Venezuela was importing 83% of the food that we eat. Currently, we are producing locally 94% of our food. Based on this fact, I want to ask you something. How do you see or what policies should be implemented in Malaysia in order to reach food security? How do you see this in the context of MADANI?
Thank you. I suppose the sanctions started with Chavez, right, when he was the president.
Yes, yes. No, I mean, we start with Hugo Chavez, and they strengthened the sanctions since 2014.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the attempt now that the government has taken on is to bring on digitalization into agriculture. They've been testing some of them under the portfolio of YB Rafizi. I'm not sure how much he's listening to those people who work on food security, not just those who are in, like Fatima Arshad in UPM, but we also have some here working on it. But I think that there is an interest, sure, to strengthen food security, and largely through digitalization, the proliferation of IR 4.0. But in terms of the engagement, which I think is critical to bring that about, which is how I feel Taiwan managed to establish it with a population of 26 million, when it actually started with Barack Obama, not just Trump, the distancing of China, tensions between China and the US. Taiwan brought back manufacturing as well as agriculture that it had been relying on China back to Taiwan. And it's been able to successfully, using the sort of strategy we use for palm oil here, price stabilization, the government would buy at that price, but then at the same time, see that the technologies that are evolving in those biotechnology parks, for example, the one in Tainan, are actually used by the farmers. In fact, including the use of robots and drones. Now, we had that framework before, MARDI, and then when paddy farmers were actually given fertilizers, we subsidized fertilizers, insecticides, then now we are focusing more on organic fertilizers, but also all these small paddy farmers with fragmented farms, they were encouraged to, and they were actually relying on them. And if you look at the statistics, I have it because I done the first Rajah book, between 70 to 79, productivity in rice increased, self-sufficiency too increased. In fact, the highest self-sufficiency we had, which is actually around 80%, was during Tun Razak, the year Tun Razak died, 1976. But that was an effective way of doing it because he did not tolerate any failures. He, in fact, changed leadership when things didn't work. For example, Felda is another one that began at, earlier than him, but much of the success took place at that time. Felda dealing with poverty alleviation, the focus on, say, rubber, oil palm cultivation. Now, let me mention that talking in similar terms, with cost of some digression, Park Chung-hee, he was a dictator because he came to power through a coup, replacing Sin Manri. He actually sent a team to study the people's car in Philippines, to study farming in Malaysia. He sent a team. And then he launched the Semal Undong in April 1970 in Busan. New village, modernizing villages, rural farms. The basis of it was really to do with the felda that we used here for farms. But like Malaysia, Semal Undong was also ailing in the 80s, was ailing. Of course, he was already gone by 1979. But importantly, 1998, you see a transformation of the Semal Undong, the new village movement, where civil society was brought in. And this civil society is a dynamic one, not the type that just go and protest on the streets. Very innovation sort of driven. So it's become a success again. In the case of Malaysia, they all got into politics. So the political ranks now define why a very successful experiment is now not seen as a success anymore. They should do that sort of so in the similarly, I feel the attempt to strengthen food security, it's 69% self-sufficiency here. The last figure I got from the stats department from Dato Uzi. Now, they should actually, and again, food security doesn't necessarily mean in real terms that people are not starving. Because here the self-sufficiency rate that we use is the amount that we import. Those people whose demand are not measured there are not there. You get what I mean? If you don't have the means to buy, you're not there. So the UN's FAO's definition of food security includes people not only buying, but people just don't have the capacity to buy. And which means to say the figures we use synonymously from the way self-sufficiency rate is measured, the actual figures actually will be more. The percentage should be more because they are not there in the measurement. This is something, a book that which is forthcoming with Springer, It's called Sustainable Agriculture and Food Security Towards Digitalization and Climate Resilience. All countries in Southeast Asia are covered, including Timor-Leste. Now, I mean, I could get that sent to you once it's out. If you think you want, in fact, we're working on a few other volumes too under our Charum thing, baseline studies that will give you the entire range about both the historicization of it, but also what governments are doing in relation to meeting those key sustainable development goals. So my feeling is something is being done, investments are being made, but the area where I feel much more should be done is the engagement of universities. These are part of those ecosystems that I mentioned. Otherwise, you're missing an important embedding instrument that should actually ease the job of the government, which is not visible. That part of it not there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions as well as I think Prof. Ulong. I think from these two questions just now, I think first it's already right start talking about our own concern as a Malaysians, what we can benefit, for instance, from the project when we talk about the high-speed train. But the second one, when we talk about the food security issues, it's not only talking about the priority because in the past, for instance, when we talk about food, it is more about to evaluate poverty, but now it's also in the fight of climate change. I think with that, I think it also make us to start thinking that when we talk about industrialized or industrials upgrading, are we really going for green transition, which is mainly technological, or even when we talk about this, we also think about nature-based solutions then. Yeah, I would then welcome the third question from the room. Yes.
Dr. Rajah, thank you. My name is Royce. I work with a German company, Robert Bosch. I've been with the company now for 31 years. Retired about a few years ago. And so in my retirement now, I'm still with the company. And then also working for M-Bank and also World Bank for Vietnam. Since 2017, when the government appointed Bosch to drive digital transformation in Malaysia, I was leading it. And all these three, from MDEC to M-Bank and World Bank, gave me a very deep penetration into the manufacturing industry. And Bosch is very manufacturing as they go. So totally agree with you that the intellectual development, especially when we count it by patents, because that is where investment goes in. So I've been working with this company that generates a patent every 30 minutes. And then they commercialize it. And because of this foundation, it spends about like 36 billion ringgit a year in R&D. Now, having said that, there are two things. Number one, our plant in Malaysia, we have got 4 plants now, I think going to exceed close to 8 billion ringgit export a year. They are actually generating a lot of patents built locally. So this thing about Malaysia not creating patents is, it's very much depending and about the drive of the company. And the second point, I really agree with you. So there's a great need to engage the universities. Yeah, and this is something that I have been saying to as many platforms have I spoken to in a Malaysian context by saying to all the academics, any one of you have got an idea or patent and things like that needs to be developed commercially, please write to Bosch, because as a foundation, they have the money, the funds, spending like 30 over billion a year. I hardly even get one from Malaysia. That's the amazing thing. We get so many from Singapore, from, as you said, from Taiwan and other countries, yeah. And then in this exposure of this company called Bosch, they have 300 plants in 66 countries. So we have a very good overview of which country, which universities, and which society are engaging. And really, and Malaysia, unfortunately, we start to see, as your chart clearly shows, the intellectual growth is directly in the same path as the GDP growth per capita per se. Yeah. Now, in my work with the World Bank in Vietnam, it gives me access into all their I have my concern. I'm not so worried about Vietnam now that I've been there. Because Malaysia is so heavily subsidized left, right, and center, top, bottom, and front and back. Yeah. So I like your wisdom on when does Vietnam really catch with us from your perspective. I have my numbers, but I think you have a far better in-depth understanding.
Thank you. Interesting question. I actually was the advisor to 2018 report that UNDP hired me to be the chief economist, transforming Vietnam from low to high value added activities, where basically, because I didn't get permission from here to be there over that long time, a team that was comprised of Vietnamese as well as other UNDP members who were there then, including Sihan from Turkey and a few others. Now, while I mention about these trajectories, if at all they actually take it on in a serious way, I don't see that long a period, because China with 1.4 billion people, 2023 per capita income over 12,000 US, Malaysia was 11,900 something, with 34 million people. Just see how dramatic China's expansion has been, not just lifting over 800 million people since 1978 out of poverty, but this sea change. And I also play a role in some advisory role to Huawei. And I've been to Longgang, for example. They have over 200,000 CCTVs in space that help monitor ESG. If you either have a panel, your handphone to check at any one time, in which case you can be any part of the world, or you can, and you're driving through, you can see the fall in crime, the fall in emissions of various, all that clear sign that things are, and that's not the only smart city. That's not the only. Shanghai, so many of them become smart cities. Me sitting in a car, I didn't drive, going through the coast, few hundred kilometers, the roads are much better than what you see in the US. The transformation is real technologically. Even I did the study for UNIDO on electric vehicles, although the launch took place in 1995, heavy subsidies and so on. When in 2014 onwards, the real catch-up took place. It's not just my work for the UNIDO, but also publications with MIT. Now, although many still doubt, but to me, BYD has overtaken Tesla. And a lot of their components actually come from Shenzhen. Huawei is one of the suppliers to them. And I'm actually, I have the know-how as well as the stages of catch-up, statistics and so on, in that UNIDO report has already been published. Now, talking about that, and you're comfortable with Vietnam because you said you did this and so on. My own feeling, the first time I went to Vietnam in '94, I was the APEC Studies Center director for Malaysia, and I was playing this role more because of, not because I was paid to go there, but because I was assisting policy. Vietnam, Laos PDR, Cambodia, and Myanmar. I went there in '94 when things were, I mean, the hotels there, old French hotels, dilapidated and so on, compared to what has become of all these countries. Even in Cambodia, a year like 2000, if you've been there, you just need 5 minutes to move from one end to the another, but you now need more than 3 hours. That's how Phnom Penh and so on have expanded. Same with Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. Now, the thing I see is, if they actually execute accordingly, rather than follow the approach both Thailand and Malaysia has taken, I think well and good, they are there in terms of catching up. And at the time I was there, their interest was a lot to do with mobile phones, Android phones and so on, looking at what Samsung should do to deepen and engage more Vietnamese suppliers. If they are going to use the leveraging strategy very well implemented by Ireland and Singapore, I can see that they will overtake Malaysia. They of course caught up significantly in relation to the per capita income. with a population of over 100 million people. They're caught up significantly, so I don't see why they would not be able to live from Malaysia if we do not back up. Yeah, GDP, of course, I mean, the largest economy here is Indonesia, but what does that mean? So just like how the Indian Prime Minister is so excited that they are the fifth largest economy in the world, but per capita terms, they are lower than even Bangladesh. He's just using it as a political instrument. We are academics.
Thank you, Professor, for your excellent presentation. David Chua. I'm an alumnus. At the same time, I am here as a private sector entrepreneur. I think when you're talking about transforming the economy, of course, what you have presented at the long-term perspective, the model, excellent. But I think the immediate concern, current and in the midterm, there are issues that we need to address in order to reach what we aspire in the long-term future that you have outlined. I think some of the problems that we face today, and we have to address now, because are we in a position to actually move in tandem with the aspirations that we have, given the present so-called management at the public sector level, for example? I mean, how do you see this? The other thing is, of course, we're talking about food security and so on. I think it's very well reported that as far as production capacity, manufacturing, mass production, it is all in oversupply. In fact, even in Malaysia, if you look at vegetable, for example, Cameron Highlands, sometimes they have to destroy vegetable in order to bring the price level to an extent that they don't incur losses. So it is the inequitable distribution rather than capacity to produce. And by extension, that goes to many, many other things, including garment. And I heard you saying that driverless vehicles in campus and so on. Well, I think human so-called manual labor is very progressively being replaced. And if we are talking about being in tune with time, driverless and so on, now how would that impact our current and in the near term prospect of employment opportunities and so on? There are many other things, of course. I would like to seek your comment on all these matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Berbahagia Dato David Chua. Let me mention that that's an interesting point that you raised, which is tackled quite extensively in a forthcoming book to which you will be invited. Will be launched by our His Royal Highness in November at BTC. It's called Imagining Malaysia's Future Through Rajah's Lenses. I'm the main editor there. Now, let me mention that if, for example, China's approach to clearing the glut in electric vehicles, because the EU and the US have raised tariffs that much higher, they didn't dump those vehicles in the ocean. Likewise, I was advising the Egg Association of Malaysia. I said the approach is wrong. Throwing eggs into the sea, it's just like you have a glut on durians, because not just because Vietnam is exporting, not just because Hainan, not Hainan, it's Hainan, yes. The island parallel to North Vietnam. I've been there, Sanya. Now, China is not, or even the farmers are not dumping them into the ocean. It's a complete wrong approach if the Cameron Highlands guys are doing it, and we discussed it there too. There must be an initiative to clear those surplus, not by destroying them. Even if so long as the price involved is higher or equal to marginal cost. Now, that's the point one needs to look at. What it means is that there must be coordination of these items, which is how Taiwanese agriculture has evolved. It does not, in other words, there's a surplus, and again, in the case of early stage moving it back from China, they give you a guaranteed price, just like our stabilization price for palm oil, for example, with the smallholders. Now that's how Taiwan has managed to get people interested in farming, the farmers, not just in diffusing the technology. Your earlier element that you alluded to, the civil service. In the same book we are discussing, in fact, it's based on interviews that I had with the previous employees who had worked under Tun Razak, which include a person I really glorify often in my work, Tun Ismail, and this is the brother of Tun Mahathir's wife, the Bank Negara governor. To me, he was an incredible civil servant. His name is Tun Ismail Ali, right? Yeah, Tun Ismail Ali. Yeah. And not just him. My interviews include speaking to former MPs. Kamal too interviewed in an earlier book. Ramar Iyer, KJ Ratnam, a number of others. There was an independence between the civil service and the political leadership then. He was very keen on performance. When things fail, including elements of Saldao in schools and he wanted change. Although, of course, from 1973, the year his advisor, Deputy Prime Minister, died, he had already become quite sick before he passed away in 1976. But the efforts it took meant that he was keen on building a potent civil service. He was even, at that time, because of that independence, he was able to even groom Tun Hanif Omar as the IGP, a relatively young man at that time, whom we think, in our book, was far better performer during Tun Razak's time than during subsequent political leaderships. So my feeling is, if they can build such an independent, competent civil service, that's an area of concern that you have raised, which I also agree to, and I think even His Royal Highness believes in what we wrote there. Thank you.
Okay, so we have these two questions, from the floor just now. One actually is asking also about what is the prospect for Vietnam, but more importantly, I think it's closer to my heart, is about the role of university, which I really appreciate that. But of course, we have also the second question, which raised to food for thoughts as well. For me, for instance, coming from academics, is that the role of bureaucrats and also politicians and the interplay of these two roles as well, from the question itself. In the interest of time, I will, okay, yes, please.
Hello, Rajah. Johan here, Johan Sarabanamutu. We go back a very long way, as you already noted. My question actually is regarding the whole issue of foreign labor and the presence of one might say a very, very large proportion of foreign labor in Malaysia's economy. How would it affect the industrial policy, the new industrial policy? Because at the moment, I think the figure for foreign labor or migrant labor is around 2-point-something% officially, but unofficially, I think Wong Chen has mentioned this many times, even in Parliament, it might be up to 6 million, right, undocumented labor. So that often has been actually sort of cited as a reason for Malaysia's middle income trap, if I'm not wrong. How do you see that factor in terms of your, the Madani industrial upgrading? Is that going to be a drag on the kinds of policies that the government wants to implement and push forward?
Thank you, Johan. Let me just address a point I missed out from an earlier question, then I come to yours. This is our Robert Bosch question. I don't see, this is because I've been working on Southeast Asian countries by being on the ground. I don't see the sort of linkages that, say, the Silicon Valley Route 128 linkages that was adapted and evolved in, say, through the eateries in Taiwan, where the engagement of universities has become intense. Largely, the eateries are the ones that lifted the standard in the universities and as well as in the firms. The eateries played a key role. It started by two Princeton PhDs in semiconductor. 1973, they led the original eatery that then mushroomed into other, each sector. Electronic, of course, had this ERSO, Electronic Research and Service. I actually have published some papers on Taiwan with a former director because she had the data, I had the writing skills. So we have some articles from Yulin and me shared. But coming to this point, Johan, one will even question if the GDP we have has actually taken account of this informal labor. It's not just Wong Chen. I mean, I also have interacted with him, but it's also the second time Tun Mahathir returned as Prime Minister. He was talking about more than 6 million as foreign labor workers here. Now, if you don't enumerate them, account them, then we may have a situation of per capita income looking high, because that 6 million, if you take out the formal 2.1 million, that many will become denominator. So that should be counted too, which means to say our per capita will be even lower than 11,900 something US in 2023. Now, you have a very important point that you raised. If you're familiar with Annali Saxenian's work, not just the regional advantage, 1994, or more importantly, the second one, the new Argonauts, 2006, she talks about the return of the diaspora with tacit knowledge. Korea, Taiwan, China, and India. India too, despite its low per capita income, tangible synergies have taken place. It hasn't. We have a talent corp. In fact, people in Malaysia in the civil service, they actually get promoted for failures. Talent corp, in fact, when I came back under the Brain Gain program in 2004, I enjoyed quite a bit of benefits, including relocation of money, no tax on it. And of course, 2 tax-free cars. So when my 5-year finished, Talent Corp wrote to me, we would like to give you another 5 years. You can order another 2 tax-free cars. I said, no. That time I was already coming back, not because of the incentives. Please, I don't want to abuse the system. So they're more interested in counting the number of people they get, not whether they are impacting our society. In fact, a number of them I felt, because we are lining up in Bank Negara to get the certification to enjoy all these benefits. This is 2004. They are not people who passionately show a return to perform. The way I got it from Maurice Chang was born in Zhejiang province, China, or Wu, Taiwan. Very passionate where he grew up. That sort of passion with frontier people brought in, translated into all this. And Annalise Saxenian mentions, discusses that in the new Argonauts. Unfortunately, to me, I give a fail to Talent Corp. Their measure is how many people they bring. A lot of them artificially put there. Most of them have already finished their life contribution, already finished, burnt out their expertise abroad and coming back here just to enjoy those benefits. Now, let me, and then you have not just that, the foreigners having a second home, they too can buy tax-free cars. Now, I think the focus should have been on bringing knowledge workers, not flooding our place with people who come and learn their expertise here. You know, you get what I mean? Which is what Singapore does, which is what Ireland does, which is what Germany now does, or Japan does. The developed countries do that. Why don't we just then turn to that? Instead, we do what the Africans do. I have done lots of UN work for African countries on the ground. They are very worried when suddenly an academic comes there. Restrictions like what Sarawak does now, very pro. They don't work on what it takes, what are the gaps we have, what it takes, who should we get. That's not the basis that they're concerned about their jobs that they are looking to hold. It's just like when I recommended Kamal, I persuade him to go as the director of the Lembaga of Unimas. Poor fellow didn't want to go. The day he arrives there, Chief Minister says, we don't want peninsular people to come and lead our organization. So Kamal left the very next day. Can you imagine the kind of parochialism that has evolved here? So that's the big problem. Our target should be, say we want to now transform semiconductors, what China is doing, catching up with what they used to import from Taiwan. They are already into 3 nano chips technology. 2 is the frontier one, although the one that makes most money is still 10 nano and on logic chips. Because you know the product cycle goes up and comes down. You launch, but still the earlier one is still earning more money. And then at some point it will overtake product cycles. Now, China has done incredibly well to respond to the shortage that has been brought about by the EU Chips Act of 2022, Science and Chip Act that Biden and Kamala Harris announced 2022 too. And then, of course, the subsequent rise in tariffs exceeding 100%. That's incredible response. It's not, China is not crying or what. It's not doing that. In a way, the US successfully undermined the Japanese catch-up in the 80s because of the trade surplus Japan was enjoying against the US. And therefore, not only that the Plaza Accord meant the yen was floated, but also the forcing the reduction of that trade flow meant that Toyota, Honda, and Nissan relocated in the US, which is why Japanese faced for many years of deflation because a whole lot of remittances coming back. At the same time, there's following out taking place, meaning Kitakushu and so on, prefectures, losing jobs because of the economy becoming more expensive and then firms going out. So basically, they undermine the US. The Japanese are not known for chips anymore. An area where they were competing quite well. But so that will be my answer. I think they have to be careful on who they import. Are they serving our purpose? And then they impose a rule that they can only work for 3 years, make life difficult after that. Most of the foreign workers that are coming here, they're learning new skills. They're not coming with tacit knowledge. No. So after 3 years, you send them back. You're basically destroying the guys using them.
That really is really an insight for me and to reflect as well. I think Prof. Ulong. The one thing is that I do realize that right when we talk about foreign labors, it's also about our own population growth as well. I think this is linked together. And of course, when we talk about digitalization and a part of automation, whether is that how many and in which area that we will have and need the imports of foreign workers and knowledge workers definitely is the way to go. It also fondly reminds me of when I joined corporate sectors in the beginning after graduation as a freshie from UTM. During that time, I remember the rule is that first year we learn, second year then we start to contribute to the company. The third year, that is when that 80 to 20%. Then of course it's more about contributing. To put that into this context, of course, is that what we want our foreign workers to be and to contribute in Malaysia then. So, okay, in the interest of time, I think right now we should already move to the next session. However, being the host and taking the liberty of being the moderator as well, Prof. Ulong. When we talk about University Malaya, and we also just now, for instance, you did mention again about the role of University Malaya, especially when we take a look on being a research university and also multidisciplinary research. Any advice that you give to us? I believe that not everyone's here, or maybe not majorities are the junior academics here, but many of us are very enthusiastic and passionate researchers, and we would like to contribute to the university. Any advice for us?
Actually, Prof. Kaharudin was expecting largely our junior lecturers with regards to how they organize and apply for grants. but I don't see any of them here. I'm not sure how these things work, but we'll come to you after this. That's a question, but let me answer your question first. Let's accept that the latest figures from the Stats Department show only Kelantan, Terengganu, and Pahang are enjoying population growth. The rest of them are mortality rates are higher than birth rates, which means to say their populations are contracting. That's the latest figure, 2024 figures. Now, coming to your point, I did make a point clear that the steering of research, because I'm a permanent advisor to KPT on research, on the strategic plan they draw and all that. Now, they are aware that they would really hope the grants that they finance, of course, we can't expect non-science to focus so much on commercialization, but at least it will be impactful for policy and for society. And they are aware that most of the time we approve projects that don't have any link there. Now, therein, the steering committee must see. It's just like I remember when I applied the last time, because the TNC told we all have to apply, set as role models. The queries I got to change the questions in the first, to me, reminded me of a graduation exercise. It's not someone with lots of immersion into policy who will do that. You get what I mean? We need to see who are these guys evaluating them. The second one I want to see, you see, it was rated medium and therefore was not in the short list there. But let me tell you that I've already got Khazanah coming in to finance it because they see policy implication there. So a committee here that didn't rate it high, I don't know who rated it, it's rated Khazanah coming in to finance it. And now the UNIDO guys, because Malaysia is under the guy who came to see me yesterday, a Japanese guy, he wants to also get involved through MITI. Now you can clearly see that there's policy relevance to the electric vehicle project that I put up there, but it was rated medium here. So what I'm telling is we need to see that those who are there know how to evaluate what contributes to policy. In fact, I can tell you some examples of projects that were approved at high here. They are basically academic exercise and not even at the frontier because such work already exists. It's just like I remember I actually helped by being a Senate rep to FBE. I helped the guy because I have done Islamic philosophy before. Now we have accepted article in a WOS journal on the destitute, Asnaf, Islamic notion of poverty evaluation, which is highly close to what Amartya Sen's freedom approach is, or even the Human Development Report of Deepak. Now, Magnet Desai. Let me mention that if you look at that, I see that as strong into dealing with poverty alleviation. Not so much the projects that they don't even show a profound review of extant literature, which I think is important. What you want to contribute there? So my feeling is to be able to do that. There's a lot of potential here, but are we tapping it correctly? Is the question now. And I think in the sciences, I can see because when Prof. Harris and me were appointed to lead on how research should be done, collaboration and teaching, we were actually, and we discovered a lot of frontier work done on vaccines, for example, vaccines, or even the science area, they actually produce. Non-science, I think, have not really been guided properly, So I feel we need to see how we evaluate what we think constitutes policy impact to society, which is why I was telling in the world ranking of innovation efficiency, which looks at impact to society and policy, we are over 100 ranked. But in terms of input money, we're putting in around 20, output publications around 30. Still okay, I feel. But the impact to society is really bad. Can you imagine? Malaysia is normally around 20s in many, many criteria. To be ranked over 100, I think it's...
Okay, that's one more question. But before that, also, sir, I would like to take note as well. I think, right, what is really, I think that's one here, and that's It's one as well. Okay, so maybe here first. Yep. So we're waiting. I think right now, what we really have to do in UM is also about monitoring and assessing the impacts that we have right on the society based on the grants that right we already awarded. Yes, please.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to everyone. My name is Dr. Mohaimin. I'm coming from Faculty of Education, and thank you, Prof, for your excellent presentation this morning and very insightful. For your kind information, Prof, I just started my tenure in UM last May, so I've been applying to a lot of grant, but now coming here, I feel preparing for the upcoming FRGS grant, and thank you for the very insightful. But it says that, Prof, I really would love to know more deeper knowledge when you mentioned about how do we actually translate the innovation into policy, and then what does that mean actually? I mean, in terms of writing part, of course we can do it, but I'm coming from the social science background. So like you mentioned just now, for the science part, is quite obvious that they can do the commercialization based on their product. But from the non-science part, how do we actually translate that into a policy? The innovation into the policy, how do we do that actually?
Yes, I think we, in the interest of time, I would like to also try take one more question. I think just now. Yes, yeah. Then right, Prof. Long will respond right both together.
Good morning. My name is Alex Ong. Actually, I'm a student here under Prof also. My question is actually in terms of research, right? We always find that that the research that is geared for truth value investigation probably doesn't exist. Especially like, for example, when we are dealing with studying of, because I'm very involved with the migrant labor in the plantation area as well. As what Prof. Johan was mentioning just now, it is actually like our policy is not inclusive, and during our data collection, normally we are actually being monitored quite closely by the establishment, especially the GLC. So before we go in, they already been told to tell us what they're supposed to say, and normally they will expect the outcome of what is in line with their beautifully window dressing policy matter. So in this particular situation, that for example, when we look in Sabah, yeah, under the official figure, we have about 5,000 undocumented stateless children there. But in our practice that we work in collaborating with the Indonesian embassy, we already have more than 26,000 stateless children go to school. And under their, under their estimation, we have another 57,000 there. So that is actually the figure that doesn't reveal in the government data, which make them present yet invisible. And now we are doing a lot of social work in getting these children the nationality identity to prepare them for the reintegration. So in this particular matter, I wonder in our MADANI policy itself, would that be any inclusive, policy that will cater for these stateless people in Malaysia? And in Peninsula itself, we are looking at bigger picture, because in the plantation sector, we have 6 million hectares, and we need roughly around 600,000 people working in this particular sector. But in the immigration record, we have probably roughly around 220,000, the deficit of 400,000 worker, which is actually mending our palm oil plantation alone. How are we going to deal with this, what we call unrevealed truth of the reality on the ground? In terms of the Universiti Malaya research, initiative, in what way, as a student or as an activist, because I've been involved with the migrant worker activism for the past 24 years, and I'm always on the ground. And then we see that there's a significant impact on our social and the what we call security matter. So I just hope that probably Professor can enlighten us on in what way that Madani policy can actually help us to get the truth and to come up with a more realistic and pragmatic policy matter onto the table. Thank you.
Let me start with the first question from our academic from the education faculty. That's a good question. Remember that at one time, and again, it's driven by a KPT, the assumption they carry is when you're a professor, you have lots of knowledge already in you, very experienced, not just in relation to producing publications, but being able to draw implications for policy. We, for example, a person like me, I don't have to put there, I'm focused on policy because every work that I have done emphasized eventually implications for policy, not just for theory. Policy becomes inevitable to do it. But unfortunately, for some reason, this thing has somehow got detached. Now, that's why at that time, they expected the head of the applicant to be a professor. It was not meant, of course, we may question, I remember now and then reading newspapers, even people calling us Professor Kangkung. I mean, that generalization I cannot do away with. But apart from them, maybe they exist, but apart from them, if we follow that sort of rule, then you must see that the elements of what it takes to understand policy is there. So that the project you apply for then can connect with policy. For example, say you want to do national agro-food policy. The last one we have is the National Agro-Food Policy number 2, launched in 2010. No, this is 2020. The earlier one is 2010. And the plan is supposed to exist until 2030. The applicant in a related area, if you're dealing with food security, must definitely go through that. If you think there is some relevance that your project would unravel in a way where it will benefit policy. But a lot of those applications don't deal at all anything with these kinds of things. It's just like somebody is writing about industrialization, they wouldn't even have seen NIM before. And also another problem I find, there is no review of what existed before. It's as if you just tell something new. These are not elements of how research evolved. It doesn't tell me that these guys even have some sort of experience dealing with what research means. You don't suddenly create something without knowing what existed there, or situational analysis or something, so that you are locating yourself in a terrain you're familiar with. That must be there. That I don't seem to see in how. So the committee that evaluates these two should be profoundly connected to these things. If they're not, I'm not sure why we have them there. Of course, I have been invited to join the committee, but I've been extremely busy. So I've not sat in this committee for a long time, the evaluation of projects. It's just like the one with the government. I don't go to Putrajaya. I only attend online because the amount of time taken to get there and to get back, which is also why I wasn't very much keen on, although I saw it as a responsibility, I cannot deny when I was appointed as advisor to the finance minister. Now, let me mention that you should, since you are applying, you should look at that, and I hope the committee will also value that. That's where the focus should be, not doing research for the sake of research, and that research not connecting to a profound review of what exists. Because it is to that, you identify the gaps there, that's the gap you want to plug, or the new steps you want to create. New steps you want to take away from what others have done. How do you extend that body of knowledge? I don't see that sort of thing being done now. You need to see those things are followed. In fact, I've already mentioned this to the minister, who, Dato Zamri. Now, coming to the next question, a lot of what you said indeed is happening. I was in the tribunal which decided on imposing a fine of more than 3 million. More than 3 million pounds on Sam Dhabi, because they had foreign workers living under slave conditions in one of the plantations. Sam Dhabi's explanation was only, oh, they are outsourced, they're not part of Sam Dhabi. Oh, but the court decided that you have to be accountable. Now, the similar thing happening around a lot, what you're mentioning. except that I have seen, in fact, I'm one who connected where there are plantations where harvesting is completely done by robots. I knew that could be done, and therefore I connected these guys who are fabricating those robots. Some plantations they should now use the FALDA framework of joint ownership to get them to smallholders. You no longer need these poor fellows to come there, poke those fruits there for it to fall on the ground. This one, it can actually take without the fruits falling on the ground, the robot. Let me tell you, my ideas come from where I was actually often a chair, UNCTAD and UNESCO sessions, as well as UNIDO. In this particular one, the Chinese experiment in Gansu province, this is in December, very cold, mountainous area. This lorry, driverless lorry, is driving up terrain, mining coal. It was driving up precision parking. Nobody inside there. Then a robot brings coal that is mined, uploads into the lorry, and the lorry drives back. Imagine this is frosty minus temperatures, effortlessly done in a Gansu province. Now, I was telling these guys, that's a lot more sophisticated than what you need to do with the robots to harvest those fruits, palm oil fruits. It's a question of, and those kind of things happen in Taiwan. In Taiwan, robots are milking cows. I've seen it. Robots are milking cows, plowing fields. Now, this is why I'm saying we are not looking at inventing something at the frontier where you make mistakes. We are looking at what others are doing. And the TRIPS agreement, Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights Agreement, is only if you trade. So a lot of machines, let me mention the Taiwanese moved away from that sort of reverse engineering. They internalized CNC machines, computer numeric control machines. Initially reverse engineering. Gradually, they produce CNC machines that are more capable, doing more different things, significantly different from the period of copyright, intellectual property right that those other machines had. Now they are exporting, including lifts and so on. Don't buy British anymore on this tower and all that. In fact, whenever I'm on the ground in Africa, I tell them, why do you buy this kind of mowers? I've seen in Taiwan this kind of mowers, much cheaper, more efficient. At least I do that sort of job to those guys there, which they subsequently wrote to me to say, more effective. But of course, the initial purchase was because of British aid, which required buying all. Thank you.
So, time's up, I think. So, thank you so much again for everyone. Basically, she said, I think right, one conclusive point is that I would like to mention also that from the talk as well as the Q&A sessions is that apart from integrating governance and policy as well as stakeholders, and this has to be done at multiple level when we need to really take into considerations, right, the impact of scales as well. So I think with that, I will hand over to the MC of the ceremony.
Thank you, Professor Goh. So we would like to acknowledge the arrival of Deputy Vice Chancellor Research and Innovation. So we would like to invite on stage to present a token of appreciation to our distinguished speaker today, Prof. Rajah Rasiah. Please welcome Professor Insigne Dr. Kaharuddin Dimyati, the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation, Universiti Malaya.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. And that concludes our event. So we encourage you to seize this opportunity to network and enhance our collaborative efforts. On behalf of the organizer, we would like to thank you for joining us here today. We invite all guests to enjoy some light refreshment. Thank you.